On screen, she was the most beautiful ghost who mesmerized all of Asia. But in reality, Joey Wong could not escape the judgment of the world. Simply for loving the wrong man, she was publicly humiliated by his family, branded as nothing more than a high-class escort. Why did an A-list superstar choose to vanish forever? How did the cruelty of Hong Kong's high society destroy the career of a legend? This is the tragic story behind the beauty. The Hong Kong of the 1980s and 90s that she stepped into was a place of dazzling contradictions. It was a city living on borrowed time, counting down the days until the 1997 handover to China. This political anxiety fueled a hedonistic, live-for-today culture where money was the only religion. The film industry was the gleaming altar of this religion, churning out movies at a breakneck pace, creating a star system that rivaled Hollywood in its reach, but far exceeded it in its brutality. In this ecosystem, actresses were often interchangeable assets. They were signed to draconian contracts, their personal lives managed and manipulated by studios that often had links to organized crime. The triads were not just a menacing background presence. They were active participants in the industry, laundering money through film productions and using violence to enforce their will. The glamour of the red carpet was merely a thin veneer over a blood-soaked reality. This was an era where Andy Lau was forced to film at gunpoint, where Tony Leung was coerced by gangsters, and most horrifying of all, the 1990 abduction of Karina Lau served as a brutal warning written in red to every artist in the city: obey or suffer. With her breathtaking beauty, Joey Wong was the ultimate prize in the eyes of these predators. She didn't have the luxury of refusal, black vans waiting at studio gates, zero-fee contracts slammed onto tables with implied threats. This was her daily reality. Her eventual flight into the arms of Peter Lam was likely not just born of ambition, but of a primal survival instinct. She was a frightened bird seeking the only tree large enough to shelter her from the storm. For a young woman entering this world, the dangers were everywhere. You had to navigate the predatory advances of producers, the controlling grip of managers, and the constant suffocating gaze of the paparazzi. And then there were the tycoons, the men who owned the real estate, the shipping lines, the hotels. They viewed the entertainment industry as their personal hunting ground. To have a famous actress on your arm was a status symbol, akin to owning a rare racehorse or a limited edition Ferrari. The dynamic was inherently predatory, masquerading as romance. They offered protection, luxury, and access to a world of unimaginable privilege. In exchange, they demanded total submission and the tacit understanding that the woman was there to serve a function, not to be a partner. Joey Wong walked into this minefield with her eyes wide open, yet completely blind to the blast radius. She was not a schemer. She was a romantic. And in the cynical world of Hong Kong high society, being a romantic was a fatal flaw. It made her vulnerable to the promises of men who viewed promises as negotiable tactics. It made her believe that love could transcend class barriers. It made her the perfect victim for a tragedy that was scripted long before she ever met Peter Lam or Chai Chin. Her journey from the basketball courts of Taiwan to the monasteries of Vancouver serves as a scathing investigation into the machinery of fame and the price of beauty. Tracing her path uncovers the hidden costs of the golden era, reveals how the industry broke its brightest stars, and explains why, for Joey Wong, the only way to survive the game was to stop playing it entirely. The story begins with a girl who was too tall, too distinctive, and too beautiful for her own good. A girl who was plucked from obscurity and placed in a gilded cage, told to sing for her supper while the world watched, waiting for the moment she would fall. This is the story of the rise and fall of Joey Wong, and it starts, as all great tragedies do, with a promise of greatness that concealed a terrible price. The machinery that consumed Joey Wong was forged on a specific factory floor, the neon-drenched, adrenaline-fueled chaos of Hong Kong in the mid-1980s. History remembers this era as the golden age of Cantonese cinema, a time when the tiny colony punched far above its weight, exporting action, comedy, and fantasy to the entire globe. It was the Hollywood of the East, a moniker that suggests glamour and prestige. But those who worked inside the system knew it by a different name, the slaughterhouse. The Hong Kong film industry of this period was a beast of unbridled capitalism, operating with the speed and ruthlessness of a stock market crash. There were no unions to speak of. There were no safety regulations. There were no limits on working hours. It was a world fueled by hot money, cash flowing in from real estate speculation, and inevitably the dark undercurrents of the triads. The organized crime syndicates of Hong Kong saw the film industry not as an artistic endeavor, but as the perfect laundromat for illicit cash. They pumped millions into productions, demanding fast returns and absolute control. In this environment, actors were not treated as talent. They were treated as assets in a high-stakes portfolio. If you were popular, you didn't just work, you were mined. You were put on a conveyor belt of production that did not stop until your box office appeal dried up or your body collapsed. Into this glittering, dangerous arena stepped a girl who could not have been more ill-prepared for its brutality. Before the world knew her as the spectral beauty Joey Wong, she was Wang Tsu-hsien, a teenager from Taipei, Taiwan. Born in 1967, her origins were worlds apart from the smoky cabarets and high society banquets of Hong Kong. She was the daughter of a renowned basketball player, and for the first act of her life, she was an athlete, not an actress. It is a detail often forgotten, but crucial to understanding her physical presence. Joey Wong was a basketball player. She stood nearly 1.72 meters tall, stately, broad-shouldered, and naturally athletic. In the context of the 1980s Asian aesthetic, which fetishized the petite, fragile, willow-waisted woman, the teenage Joey was considered an anomaly. She was too tall. She was too imposing. She lacked the delicate, submissive physicality that was the standard currency for female stars of the time. When she walked, she had the stride of an athlete, not the mince of a courtesan. Yet she possessed a face that defied logic, a striking combination of thick, assertive eyebrows and eyes that seemed to hold a reservoir of ancient sadness, creating a mesmerizing contrast between her powerful frame and her melancholic gaze. Her discovery was almost accidental, the result of a sneaker commercial she filmed in Taiwan. That brief appearance was enough to catch the eye of the scouts from Shaw Brothers, the legendary Hong Kong studio. They saw something in her that transcended the local market. They saw a face that could hold a close-up against any backdrop. In 1984, at the tender age of 17, unable to speak a word of Cantonese, she was signed, packed up, and shipped to Hong Kong. The early years were a period of intense isolation. Imagine being 17 years old, separated from your family, dropped into the most densely populated, hyper-competitive city on earth where you do not speak the language. She was housed in the studio dormitories, living a life that was less about stardom and more about survival. In her first few films, she was cast in the archetypal flower vase roles, the pretty silent distraction for the male lead, there to look terrified or adoring as the plot required. Critics dismissed her. They called her tall and clumsy. They said she was just another pretty face imported from Taiwan, who would fade away within a year. She was an outsider struggling to find her footing in a culture that viewed mainlanders and Taiwanese as country bumpkins. Then came 1987, the year everything changed, the year the trap was set. Producer Tsui Hark, a visionary maverick of Hong Kong cinema, was preparing to remake an old folk tale, a Chinese ghost story. He was looking for his Nie Xiaoqian, a female ghost enslaved by a tree demon, forced to seduce travelers to their doom while secretly longing for liberation. The casting process was arduous. Every major actress in Hong Kong wanted the role. Initially, Joey Wong wasn't even on the short list. She was considered too tall, too modern, too athletic for a role that required ghostly grace. But Joey, perhaps sensing that this was her one chance to break out of the flower vase mold, campaigned aggressively for an audition. When she stepped into costume, something alchemical happened. The very height that critics had mocked transformed her. In the flowing, layered robes of the period costume, her 1.72-meter frame didn't look clumsy. It looked unearthly. She didn't walk, she drifted. Her athleticism allowed her to handle the wire work, the technique used to make actors fly, with a natural fluid grace that smaller actresses couldn't match. And her eyes, those sorrowful, misty eyes, perfectly captured the tragedy of Nie Xiaoqian. She wasn't playing a monster. She was playing a victim. She was playing a woman trapped in a system she couldn't escape, serving a master she despised. In hindsight, it was the most autobiographical role she would ever play. The release of A Chinese Ghost Story was a seismic event. It didn't just break box office records. It shifted the cultural axis of Asia. Joey Wong became an overnight sensation, a phenomenon that swept from Tokyo to Bangkok. She was no longer just an actress. She was the goddess. The image of her washing her hair in the wooden tub, or flying through the blue-lit mist with her long hair billowing, became the defining erotic and romantic ideal for a generation of men. But success in Hong Kong is a double-edged sword. If failure gets you ignored, success gets you devoured. The industry looked at Joey Wong and didn't see an artist to be nurtured. They saw a gold mine to be stripped. The period from 1987 to 1989 can only be described as a frantic blur of exploitation. Her management company, realizing they had the hottest commodity in Asia, booked her with a ferocity that bordered on inhumane. This was the era of the Joey Wong shift. At the peak of her fame, she was filming up to 15 movies a year. The physical reality of that number was punishing. 15 films a year meant she was essentially shooting a feature-length film every 3 weeks, overlapping constantly. There were days, documented by crew members, where she did not sleep for 48 hours. She would finish a night shoot for a ghost movie at 4 a.m., wipe off the fake blood, sleep in the van for 45 minutes while being driven to a different studio, and wake up at 6 a.m. to play a bubbly girlfriend in a modern comedy. She was living in a state of perpetual jet lag without ever leaving the city. She became a fixture of the studio lots, a ghost in her own life. She famously joked in interviews that she lived her life in the makeup chair, that she had no home, only trailers and hotel rooms. But looking back at the footage from this era, the joke falls flat. You can see the exhaustion etched into her face, that famous melancholy that critics praised, that distant, watery look in her eyes that audiences found so romantic. It wasn't just method acting. It was the dissociation of a young woman who was physically and mentally shattering. She was sleepwalking through her own stardom. Yet even in this state of exhaustion, she was capable of brilliance. By 1993, director Tsui Hark decided to strip away the innocent veneer of Nie Xiaoqian entirely. He cast Joey in Green Snake alongside the razor-sharp Maggie Cheung. Gone was the sorrowful ghost. In her place was White Snake, carnal, enchanting, and utterly womanly. The scenes of her undulating in the water, or the sharp predatory glint in her eyes as she seduced Tsu-hsien, were a defiant statement. She was not just a flower vase. She could act. But fate has a cruel sense of irony. The role of White Snake became a prophecy for her own life, a spirit cultivating herself for 1,000 years, desperate to shed her skin and taste human love, only to discover that the human world was far more treacherous than the demon realm she left behind. Behind the scenes, the pressure was terrifying. This was the time when the triads were most active in the industry. Actors didn't have the luxury of saying no. If a producer with connections wanted Joey Wong in their movie to secure foreign distribution sales, Joey Wong was in the movie. It didn't matter if the script was unfinished. It didn't matter if she was sick. It didn't matter if she was already shooting 3 other films. The contracts were signed, often under duress or through manipulative management deals that gave the artist little agency. She was a bird in a gilded cage, singing on command, her feathers plucked one by one to line the pockets of men she barely knew. The tragedy of this period is that while she was becoming the most desired woman in Asia, she was also becoming the most isolated. She had no time for friends, no time for romance, no time to develop a personality outside of the characters she played. Her entire existence was mediated by the camera lens. She was surrounded by handlers, assistants, and makeup artists, yet she was profoundly alone. The disconnect between her public image and her private reality was widening into a chasm. To the public, she was a supernatural being, above earthly concerns. In reality, she was a tired, overworked employee in a factory that manufactured dreams, desperately craving a connection that wasn't scripted. It was this profound loneliness, this exhaustion with the hollow victory of fame, that made her vulnerable. She began to look for an exit. She began to look for a savior. And in the patriarchal narrative of the time, a savior looked like a powerful man. She didn't want to be the goddess anymore. She wanted to be taken care of. She wanted to rest. This desperation for sanctuary would lead her straight into the arms of the very forces that would ultimately destroy her. The stage was set for the 1990s, where the exploitation of her labor would morph into the exploitation of her heart. The canary was tired of singing. She wanted to build a nest, but she had forgotten that in Hong Kong the nest belonged to the falcons. As the decade turned, Joey Wong was wealthy, famous, and adored. She was the face of Asian cinema. But inside, the athlete from Taiwan was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned the hard way that in the glittering world of Hong Kong, being a star just meant you burned out faster than everyone else. She was ready to make a change. She was ready to gamble everything on love, and she had no idea that the house always wins. As the 1990s dawned, the neon lights of Hong Kong burned brighter than ever, but for Joey Wong, the glare had become blinding. She was 26 years old, a veteran of nearly 60 films, and she was spiritually bankrupt. The grueling schedule of the 80s had hollowed her out. To the outside world, she was the Queen of Asia, a deity draped in designer silk. But in the quiet moments between takes, she was a young woman gripped by a profound existential panic. She had spent her entire adolescence pretending to be other people. She had no idea who she was when the director yelled, "Cut." It was in this state of vulnerability that Joey Wong made a fatal calculation. She began to view her career not as a vocation, but as a sentence she needed to commute. Like many actresses of her generation, conditioned by a deeply conservative, patriarchal society, she saw marriage as the only legitimate escape route. In the cultural narrative of Hong Kong, a woman's success was not measured by her box office receipts, but by who she married. The ultimate prize, the happy ending, was to marry into the aristocracy, to find a harbor that would protect her from the storms of the industry. She didn't just want a husband, she wanted a shield. And so, when Peter Lam entered her life, he didn't look like a businessman. He looked like salvation. Peter Lam was the scion of the Lai Sun Group, one of Hong Kong's most powerful conglomerates. He was royalty in a city without a king. His family owned hotels, real estate, and crucially vast swathes of the entertainment industry. He was a man who moved through the world with the easy, terrifying confidence of someone who has never heard the word no. He was also a predator who knew exactly how to hunt. He pursued Joey with a relentless, overwhelming generosity. It wasn't just about the diamonds or the luxury cars, though there were plenty of those. It was about the promise of legitimacy. He offered her the one thing the film studios refused to give her, the promise that she could stop running. He told her he wanted to take care of her. He told her she didn't have to work anymore. For a woman who had been treated as a mule for a decade, these words were intoxicating. They were the siren song that lured her onto the rocks. But there was a problem, a massive, insurmountable obstacle that Joey, in her naivety, chose to ignore. Peter Lam was married. His wife, Lin Chen-ming, was also a Taiwanese actress, a detail that added a grotesque layer of irony to the unfolding tragedy. Lam was a master manipulator. He spun Joey a tale that is as old as adultery itself. He told her his marriage was dead. He told her he and his wife were living separate lives, bound only by paper and public appearance. He swore that divorce proceedings were imminent, that it was just a matter of legal technicalities. He looked Joey in the eye and promised her that she was not a mistress, but a future wife in waiting. And Joey believed him. Critics and historians have often debated why she was so credulous. Was it arrogance? Was it stupidity? Or was it simply the desperation of a drowning woman clutching at a lifeline? She didn't hide the affair. She didn't skulk in the shadows. In her mind, she had done nothing wrong. She was simply waiting for the man she loved to be free. She was seen openly with him, moving into a luxury property, on ownership provided by the Lai Sun Group. She acted like the lady of the house before the keys were officially handed over. She had underestimated the one force in Hong Kong more powerful than a tycoon, the tycoon's mother. The Lam family was ruled by the matriarch, Yu Baozhu. In the dynastic structures of Hong Kong wealth, the matriarch is often the true power behind the throne, the guardian of the family's face and fortune. Yu Baozhu was a woman of steel, a traditionalist, who viewed the entertainment industry with thinly veiled contempt. To her, actresses were acceptable as temporary amusements for her son, but they were absolutely forbidden from entering the inner sanctum of the family. When the affair became undeniable, when the tabloids began to speculate that Joey Wong might actually become the next Mrs. Peter Lam, the matriarch decided it was time to intervene. She did not do so quietly. She did not send a private letter. She chose the nuclear option. The destruction of Joey Wong happened in broad daylight, via a press conference that remains one of the most brutal events in Hong Kong pop culture history. The reporters gathered, sensing blood. They asked Mrs. Yu about her son's relationship with the famous goddess. They asked if she would accept Joey as a daughter-in-law. Yu Baozhu didn't just say no. She smiled a cold, terrifying smile and delivered the line that would haunt Joey for the rest of her life. Treat it as if my son spent a few dozen million just to hire a high-class escort. The room surely must have gone silent before the camera shutters exploded. With 12 words, the matriarch had obliterated Joey Wong. She hadn't just rejected her, she had redefined her. She stripped away the romance, the love, the promises, and reduced the entire relationship to a sordid financial transaction. She called the most famous woman in Asia a prostitute. It was a calculated act of social murder. By framing the relationship as hiring an escort, she absolved her son of any responsibility. He was just a man paying for a service, and placed the entire burden of shame onto Joey. The public reaction was swift and merciless. Hong Kong society, for all its modernity, was deeply conservative. The Jade Girl image was shattered. The audience that had worshipped Nie Xiaoqian now turned on Joey with the fury of a betrayed lover. She was branded a fox spirit, a seductress, a gold digger, a homewrecker, who had tried to steal another woman's husband and been put in her place by the righteous matriarch. The cruelty of the situation was compounded by the actions of Peter Lam. In the face of his mother's wrath and the public outcry, the hero, who had promised to protect Joey, did exactly what weak men do. He folded. He did eventually divorce his wife, Lin Qianming, but he did not marry Joey. The cost was too high. The fun was over. He retreated back into the fortress of his family's wealth, leaving Joey standing alone in the ruins of her reputation. It was a total defeat. Joey had gambled everything, her name, her career, her dignity, on the word of a man who viewed her as a collectible. She had tried to escape the exploitation of the film industry, only to fall into the exploitation of the aristocracy. The lesson was brutal. In the eyes of the elite, her fame was not currency. It was a novelty act. She was not a person to them. She was something to be consumed for a few dozen million. The psychological toll was catastrophic. Joey Wong, the woman who had floated through the air in a Chinese ghost story, crashed to earth. The city she had conquered now felt like a prison of whispering voices. Every headline was a fresh wound. Every camera flash was an accusation. She realized she could not stay. The harbor she had sought in Hong Kong turned out to be a slaughterhouse. In 1994, broken and humiliated, Joey Wong did the only thing she could do to survive. She ran. She packed her bags and fled to Canada for the first time. It was not a vacation, it was an exile. She needed to be somewhere where nobody knew her name, where nobody looked at her and saw the high-class escort Mrs. Yu had described. She needed to wash the grime of Hong Kong off her skin. But the tragedy of Joey Wong is that she is a woman of immense resilience, and resilience, paradoxically, can be a curse. It makes you stand up when you should stay down. It makes you try one more time. As she walked the quiet streets of Vancouver, nursing her wounds, a ghost from her past began to call out to her, a man who was the polar opposite of Peter Lam, a wild, unkempt rocker who had known her before she was a goddess, back when she was just a girl in sneakers. She began to think that maybe she had just chosen the wrong type of man. Maybe the safety she craved wasn't in a bank account, but in a soulmate. She began to look back toward Asia, toward Taiwan, and toward Chai-Chin. She didn't know it yet, but she was walking toward a cliff edge even steeper than the one she had just fallen from. The first tragedy had taken her reputation. The second would take her heart. If the affair with Peter Lam was a violent collision with the external world, a brutal lesson in social hierarchy and class warfare, the second great tragedy of Joey Wong's life was an implosion. It was a silent, suffocating catastrophe that happened not in the boardrooms of Hong Kong, but in the intimate, sacred spaces of the heart. It was a betrayal so deep, so structural, that it didn't just break her heart, it dismantled her entire capacity to believe in human truth. The agent of this final unraveling was the man who stood at the center of her emotional universe, Chai-Chin. In the landscape of Asian entertainment, Chai-Chin was the polar opposite of the polished, ruthless tycoons like Peter Lam. He was Taiwan's prodigal son, a rock star with wild long hair, leather jackets, and a voice that rasped with the raw, unpolished grit of the streets. He was known as the Wolf, a moniker taken from his most famous hit song, a lone drifter howling at the moon. He and Joey had a history that stretched back to 1987, a turbulent, passionate, on-again, off-again romance that had played out in the background of her rise to stardom. After the devastation of the Peter Lam scandal in the mid-90s, Joey retreated. She was bruised, humiliated, and branded a pariah by the Hong Kong press. In that darkness, Tsu-hsien reappeared. He didn't judge her. He didn't care about the high-class escort insults. He welcomed her back with open arms. To Joey, this felt like a revelation. She interpreted his acceptance as the ultimate proof of unconditional love. Here was a man who knew her before the fame, who saw the girl beneath the goddess persona, and who was willing to stand by her when the rest of the world was spitting on her name. Their reunion in the late 1990s was hailed by the media as the century's great reconciliation. It was a redemption arc that the public ate up. The narrative shifted. Joey wasn't the gold-digging homewrecker anymore. She was the wandering beauty who had finally returned to her true love. When they appeared together at the Golden Melody Awards in 1997, holding hands, the applause was deafening. It seemed that fate had finally corrected itself. In 1987, a melody swept through the alleyways of Taiwan, becoming the anthem for long-distance lovers, approximately in the winter. Tsu-hsien wrote it in just 15 minutes on a lonely night when Joey had to fly back to Hong Kong. You step lightly, and then you leave just as lightly. The lyrics were torn from the wild rocker's heart, dedicated to his muse. Joey once confessed that every time she heard it in her car, she would weep. She believed in its eternity. But tragically, during the very years this melody was being hailed as proof of their undying love, Tsu-hsien was secretly supporting another woman. The most beautiful love song of the 90s turned out to be a magnificent velvet curtain hiding a 15-year lie. For the next few years, Joey basked in a sense of safety she had never known. She began to dismantle her defenses. She spoke openly in interviews about her desire to retire, to have children, to live a simple life as a wife. By 2001, the fairy tale was nearing its climax. The wedding date was being set. They purchased a luxury home in Taipei to serve as their marital sanctuary. They visited a high-ranking Buddhist master in Tibet to seek blessings for their union. Joey was seen trying on wedding dresses, her face glowing with a peace that had been absent for nearly 2 decades. She told friends that she was finally coming home. But just days before the dream was to become reality, the past didn't just knock on the door, it kicked it down. In August 2001, a woman named Fang Meifang emerged from the shadows of Taipei's working-class districts and filed a lawsuit that would detonate Joey Wong's life. Fang was an ex-girlfriend of Tsu-hsien from long before his fame, a woman from his turbulent youth. She wasn't seeking fame, she was seeking child support. She claimed that she and Tsu-hsien had an illegitimate son, a boy named Fang Wei, who was now nearly 15 years old. The news hit the tabloids with the force of a bomb. But for Joey, the existence of the child was not the shrapnel that killed her. Joey Wong was a modern, empathetic woman. She was not so narrow-minded that she couldn't accept a partner with a past. If Tsu-hsien had come to her, sat her down, and told her, "I have a son from a previous relationship, and I need to care for him," she likely would have embraced the boy. She had enough love to give. The fatal blow was the timeline. The fatal blow was the silence. As the lawsuit progressed and the DNA test confirmed paternity, the horrifying truth emerged. Tsu-hsien had known about the boy all along. For 15 years, the entire duration of his acquaintance with Joey, he had been secretly wiring money to Fang Meifang. He had negotiated visitation. He had allowed her to plan a wedding, buy a house, and announce her happiness to the world, all while knowing that a 15-year-old time bomb was ticking beneath the floorboards. It was a betrayal of staggering proportions. It wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a sustained, calculated architecture of deceit maintained for a decade and a half. The humiliation was total. Once again, Joey was the last to know. The media knew, the lawyers knew, the public knew, and she was left standing in her wedding dress, realizing the groom was a stranger. She had fled the tycoons because they were transactional liars, only to find that the artist she loved was the greatest actor of them all. The psychological devastation of this moment cannot be overstated. With Peter Lam, she lost her reputation. With Tsu-hsien, she lost her faith in reality. If the man who claimed to love her more than life itself could lie to her face every single day for 15 years, then what was true? Was love even real, or was it just another script, another performance, another trap? Joey's reaction was swift and absolute. There was no screaming match, no public negotiation. She simply shut down. She canceled the wedding. She sold the house. She looked at the wreckage of her life. 34 years old, childless, unmarried, twice publicly humiliated on a massive scale. And she made a decision. She gave a brief interview in the aftermath, her voice devoid of the usual emotion, flat and dead. She uttered a sentence that signaled the end of Joey Wong as the world knew her. In my dictionary, the word marriage will never exist again. It wasn't a dramatic threat. It was a statement of fact. She had tried the path of the Jade Girl, and it had enslaved her. She had tried the path of the tycoon's wife, and it had shamed her. She had tried the path of true love, and it had deceived her. There were no paths left to try. In late 2001, she announced she was leaving Taiwan. She wasn't just leaving the country, she was leaving the narrative. She took a role in one final film, Shanghai Story, a movie that feels less like a performance and more like a funeral dirge for her own career. But before she could fully vanish, before she could board that final plane to Canada, the universe had one last cruel lesson to teach her. A lesson about the fragility of life that would seal her decision to abandon the world of fame forever. The ghosts were closing in, and the one who would finally convince her to let go was the person who understood her best, her brother, Leslie Cheung. By 2002, Joey Wong was a woman walking through the wreckage of her own life. The betrayal by Tsu-hsien had severed her tether to the romantic world, but she was still contractually bound to the professional one. She had returned to the set to film Shanghai Story, a movie that would unwittingly become her swan song. Watching that film now feels voyeuristic. You are not watching an actress play a role. You are watching a woman decompose on screen. Her character is a fading beauty in a changing world, and the exhaustion in Joey's eyes is so palpable it hurts to look at. She was going through the motions, a ghost haunting her own career, waiting for a sign that it was finally time to stop. On April 1st, 2003, that sign arrived, and it came with the violence of a thunderclap. In the late afternoon, news began to filter out of the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in Hong Kong. A body had been found on the pavement. Within the hour, the unthinkable was confirmed. Leslie Cheung, the king of canto pop, the darling of the industry, had jumped to his death. For the world, it was the loss of a superstar. For Joey Wong, it was the death of a soulmate. Leslie was not just her co-star from a Chinese ghost story. He was her Gorgor, her older brother. They were mirror images of each other. Both were creatures of immense beauty and sensitivity. Both were trapped by their own iconic images, and both felt the crushing, suffocating weight of the media's gaze more consistently than their peers. When they looked at each other, they saw the only other person who truly understood the loneliness of the pedestal. Leslie's suicide shattered Joey completely. It wasn't just grief, it was terror. His death was a stark, irrefutable confirmation of everything she had come to fear, that the industry was not just difficult, it was lethal. It whispered to her that sensitivity was a fatal flaw in this game. If Leslie, the most talented, the most beloved, the most resilient of them all, could be devoured by the darkness, what chance did she have? His death broke the last illusion that fame offered any kind of protection. It was a grim warning written in blood on the pavement of Hong Kong. Get out, or this machine will kill you too. The mourning period was the catalyst. The indecision that had plagued her for years evaporated. She realized that she was standing at a crossroads. She could continue to be Joey Wong, the aging icon, fighting for relevance, enduring the tabloids, and slowly withering away under the lights. Or she could kill Joey Wong herself and let the human being underneath Wang Tsu-hsien survive. In 2004, Shanghai Story was released to critical acclaim, but Joey was barely there to hear it. She did not bask in the applause. Instead, she began a systematic dismantling of her existence. This was not a hiatus. This was a demolition. She sold her properties in Hong Kong and Taiwan. She liquidated her assets. She dismissed her staff. She changed her phone numbers and cut ties with almost everyone in the industry. She treated her fame like a contaminated garment. She took it off, threw it in the fire, and walked away naked into the unknown. She chose Vancouver, Canada. It was the perfect destination, a city of rain, mountains, and quiet grays. It was a place where the pace of life was glacial compared to the frenetic heartbeat of Hong Kong. It was a place where she could be invisible. The Joey Wong who landed in Vancouver was unrecognizable from the goddess who had graced 1,000 magazine covers. She didn't move into a celebrity enclave to host dinner parties. She moved into a spiritual fortress. She committed herself fully to Buddhism, taking the lay name Hang Ju. This wasn't the trendy aesthetic spirituality of Hollywood stars. This was a desperate, disciplined search for inner silence. She sought Tanamo, refuge. For the last 20 years, the silence from Vancouver has been deafening. The film industry, unable to accept that its favorite toy had simply walked away, refused to let her go. Producers sent blank checks. Reality TV shows offered millions of dollars for a single appearance. Directors promised roles that would win her Oscars. She refused them all. She didn't negotiate. She didn't even respond. The occasional glimpses the world has had of her since 2004 have been grainy, unauthorized snapshots taken by stunned tourists in grocery stores or bubble tea shops. These images are fascinating. They show a woman in baggy jeans, oversized sweaters, her hair unstyled, riding the public bus. She is seen waiting in line for discounted vegetables. She is seen praying in temples, her eyes closed, her face devoid of makeup, but radiating a strange, calm light. The tabloids, cruel to the end, often ran these photos with headlines mocking her decline. They shrieked that the goddess had become a fat auntie, that she looked old, that she looked ordinary. Vancouver was supposed to be a sanctuary, but the paparazzi turned it into a hunting ground. In 2013, they captured an image of her on the street with a swollen face. Immediately, the tabloids ran the headline, "The Goddess Deformed." They gleefully dissected her 46-year-old features, spinning malicious tales of botched plastic surgery or disfiguring accidents. They refused to let her age. They demanded she remain eternal or die a tragic death. Joey's response was a masterclass in dignity. She released a short, self-recorded video. No explanations, no tears. She simply said, "I am fine. I am living my life. May everyone be at peace." That cold, calm stillness was the hardest slap in the face to those trying to monetize her pain. But they missed the point entirely. They were looking at these images through the lens of a celebrity culture that fears aging and irrelevance. If you look closer, you don't see a woman who has let herself go. You see a woman who has let herself be. For the first time since she was 17 years old, she was sleeping when she wanted to sleep. She was eating what she wanted to eat. She was walking down the street without a bodyguard. She was aging, yes, but she was aging on her own terms, reclaiming the natural human process that the industry had forbidden her from experiencing. The ordinary life of riding buses and buying groceries was not a punishment. It was the luxury she had paid for with 20 years of trauma. By 2005, the transformation was complete. The goddess was dead, left behind in the archives of the Shaw Brothers studio. In her place stood a middle-aged woman in Canada, reciting sutras, finally safe from the wolves. She had successfully orchestrated the greatest escape act in Asian showbiz history. She had vanished in plain sight, leaving the world with nothing but memories and a question. Was it worth it? The answer to that question lies in the silence she has maintained for 2 decades. A silence that speaks louder than any movie dialogue she ever delivered. When we survey the ruins and the glory of Joey Wong's life, it is tempting to retreat to the safety of old cliches. In Chinese culture, there is a 4-character idiom that is often whispered whenever her name is mentioned. Hong Yanbo Ming. Beautiful women suffer unhappy fates. It is a poetic, tragic sentiment that frames her suffering as a cosmic inevitability, a tax levied by the gods in exchange for the gift of her face. It suggests that a woman so lovely was simply not meant for the coarseness of this earth. But this narrative is a lie. To call Joey Wong's life a matter of fate is an act of intellectual cowardice. It absolves the real villains of their crimes. Her tragedy was not written in the stars. It was manufactured in the boardrooms of film studios and the private dining rooms of the elite. Her story is not a fable about the cruelty of the gods. It is a scathing indictment of a specific time, a specific place, and a specific system that cannibalized its own children. Joey Wong was the ultimate victim of a patriarchal capitalist machine that viewed female beauty as a natural resource to be extracted, refined, and sold until it was depleted. The film industry, fueled by triad money and driven by a sweatshop mentality, stole her youth. They took a teenage athlete and worked her into a state of dissociation, denying her the basic human right to rest, all to feed a box office beast that never felt full. They turned her eyes into icons of sorrow, but refused to acknowledge the real pain behind them. Then there was the high society of Hong Kong, a feudal system masquerading as a modern metropolis. To the tycoon class, Joey Wong was never a person. She was a luxury item. She was a trophy to be mounted on the arm to display dominance, and then discarded the moment she demanded the respect due to a wife. The insult delivered by the Lam matriarch, reducing a cinema legend to a high-class escort, was not just a slur against Joey. It was a revelation of how the wealthy viewed every woman who dared to earn a living with her image. They loved the goddess on the screen, but they despised the woman who dared to try and walk through their front door. And perhaps most painfully, there was the betrayal of intimacy. The men she loved, from the billionaires to the rockers, failed her in the most fundamental way. They loved the idea of her. They loved owning the woman every other man wanted. but they could not offer her the one thing she craved above all else: honesty. She spent 20 years searching for a sanctuary, a home where she could take off the mask and just be Wang Tsu-hsien. But every home she stepped into turned out to be a stage set, built on lies and rented time. Today, when the paparazzi snap a photo of a 57-year-old woman in Vancouver dressed in cheap clothes and waiting for a bus, the tabloids scream tragedy. They mourn the loss of the Jade Girl. They pity her solitude. They are wrong. To look at Joey Wong today is not to see a woman who has lost everything. It is to see a woman who has finally won the only war that matters, the war for ownership of herself. Her exile in Canada is not a defeat. It is a radical act of defiance. In a world that demanded she remain young, beautiful, and available forever, she committed the ultimate rebellion. She chose to age. She chose to be ordinary. She chose to be real by refusing the millions of dollars offered for her comeback, by refusing to inject her face with fillers to chase a ghost of her youth. She is rejecting the very currency that the world used to enslave her. She is saying with her silence that her peace is not for sale. She has achieved what her most famous character, Nia Xiaoqian, fought for in a Chinese ghost story. Nia Xiaoqian was a ghost enslaved by a demon, forced to wear a beautiful mask to lure men to their doom, desperately praying for reincarnation so she could be a normal human being. Joey Wong has finally reincarnated. She has escaped the tree demon of the entertainment industry. She has laid down the burden of being a goddess. The image of her standing alone at a bus stop in the rain in Vancouver is not sad. It is the most triumphant image of her entire career. It is the image of a survivor. She is no longer the property of the studio, the property of the tycoon, or the property of the audience. She belongs finally and irrevocably to herself. The goddess has vanished into the mist, leaving the world with its memories and its regrets. But the woman is finally free. And that, in the end, is the only happy ending that is real.